Well, thank you, Rosie. That was indeed an inspiring update, which I know many of us are looking forward to see evolve. And if we can offer support in any way, shape, or form, because I know speak for all of the museums and state planners that are here in the room today, please let us know how we can help, because we share your aspirations for this country. Thank you. I committed a bit of a faux pas last night. I told you who I wasn't, but I didn't tell you who I was. Because typically when I speak in this room, most people know who I am. I'm Cliff Fleet. I'm the president of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, and I didn't introduce myself before my remarks last night, so I apologize for that. But I really am honored to be up here and introduce our next two speakers. I am privileged to have this job, and one of the great joys I have in this experience is that I get to work with some immensely talented people and be inspired by work that is being done to shape our nation in very profound and powerful ways. And these next two women are two of the finest example of that I can imagine. We are really pleased to have here today Paula Kerger, who's the CEO of PBS, and Sarah Botstein, who's an executive producer, who has worked for Ken Burns for many, many years. And we are blessed to have them come and talk about Ken Burns' new film, which is going to be introduced. Paula Kerger is the longest serving president and CEO in PBS's history. Over the last 18 years, she's led the transformation of PBS from a broadcaster to a multi-platform digital media organization. Just as importantly, Paula works with a system of more than 300 independent member stations across the country, a true local media infrastructure in an age when local media is struggling. And Ken Burns and his team at Florentine Films have made some of the most memorable and most important films about our collective history as a nation. Sarah Botstein has worked with Ken for more than 25 years, co-directing the recent work, The U.S. and the Holocaust, and producing such films as Hemingway, the Vietnam War, Prohibition, and the War, among others. Today, Paula will share with us her thoughts about the 250th anniversary and the work PBS plans to do to help drive this conversation leading up to and around the film's premiere, and then through 2026 and beyond. And then Sarah is going to share some of her thoughts on Ken Burns' new piece, The American Revolution film, and we'll also offer a few sneak peeks of the film, which I want everybody to know to please not take pictures, not take videos, because I see everybody doing that. This is the first public showing of any piece of this thing, and we want to make sure that it is protected. So please, no pictures and no cameras as we hear this wonderful update from these two immensely talented women. So please join me in welcoming Paula and Sarah up here to the stage. Thank you all.
Wow, Cliff, that was a great introduction. Now we've got to live up to all this promise. Yes. It is really a great pleasure to be here, to be partnered with Colonial Williamsburg and with so many organizations, and we're hoping by the end of today's lunch, we'll be partnering with all of you. It is a special privilege to be here as part of the Virginia 250. PBS is housed in Virginia and have been for most of its life. There was a brief period in Washington until a fire took us out of L'Enfant Plaza and took us across the river, and that's where we've lived ever since. I'm also a proud Virginia resident of Loudoun County, so this is, yay, Loudoun, yeah? So this is really a great day because, as Cliff just teased, you are the very first people to see any piece of this upcoming film that Ken and Sarah and David Schmidt have created. I should say are creating, and Sarah will tell you a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We have been working for many years in thinking about not only this film, but about this milestone moment in our nation's history. Because a milestone is important to acknowledge, of course, and 250 years is a significant one. But the moments that it opens up and the opportunities, particularly at this time in our country's history, are so profound. And I am old enough to remember the bicentennial minutes. A few of you are laughing. I know more of you remember them. I also remember where I was July 4th. of 1976, I was at Fort McHenry watching the fireworks as the sun came up. And it was a profound moment in my life. I was a young person, much younger person. But I think this moment for all of us is really important. And as Cliff said, I feel in many ways we were built for this moment. By we, I mean PBS. We have 330 stations that are in every community in this country. And we have an opportunity, if we come together, to build on this great work, of which you will see a very, very small piece in a few minutes, to really begin to bring people together as we move into 2026. We are alongside of the broadcast of the film itself. We have put together, or are putting together, a multi-pronged, multi-platform initiative that we're calling PBS America at 250. So we're doing a lot of other programming, not just this film. As significant as this film is, we have many producers that are also thinking about how do we look at this moment to not understand who we are in our history, but also our culture and our ideas. And this is what I am calling on all of you to rally around. And as part of this, through the generous support of Bank of America, I know BOA's in the room. Thank you, Bank of America, who has been the longtime corporate supporter of Ken's work, the Better Angel Society, an extraordinarily generous foundation, the Kern Family Foundation, that not only put money into this film, but is enabling what will be, for PBS, the largest education engagement activity that we have ever undertaken. And so we're really excited. And we are really excited to have the opportunity to be with you to talk about what we have ahead. So let's talk first about the film itself. Can you tell us a little bit about this project, and first how long you've been working on it as well?
Okay, well, thank you, and thank you to Colonial Williamsburg. We're just discussing that I think we've filmed at this location more than any other, and we will be here tomorrow morning if anyone wants to see us actually shooting the movie. We, about 8 years ago, embarked on a 6-part, 12-hour series looking at the revolution, from the seeds of revolution through the ratification of the Constitution. It will be, like all of our work, an epic big series that looks at our founding struggle and our origin story, which is extremely unique and utterly important. We're telling the stories of men and women, young and old, those you've heard of, those that you haven't. The story of Black Americans, free and enslaved, Native Americans, and from the North to the South. It's an incredibly complicated, inspiring, difficult war that's both a political war of ideas and an actual war. And I think in making the film, we've been surprised every day at what we don't know and what we should know, and how to bring the country together around a conversation about this amazing moment.
So I've been thinking a lot about this project and listening to you talk about it as it's been in development. So this is different than, of course, when everyone thinks about the work of Florentine, you think about the Civil War, or you think about the series that you did on World War II, the war, Vietnam War. You also did things other than wars, obviously, Hemingway and
Small films that aren't about
small
wars.
films,
Yeah.
Prohibition and so forth. But there was a lot of images, photography, in some cases, video. I don't think there's any video from,
No
this
living
period.
witnesses, no photographs,
Yeah.
no news reports, yeah.
So talk about just how the film was put together and what it looks like. And
Yeah, well, so the film is co-directed by Ken Burns, who is not here today, and David Schmidt, who is. David, are you in the room? So David is the other partner in making this film. He comes to this subject very naturally. He grew up in Colonial Williamsburg. He was a fifer in the drum and fife corps. As a little boy, we have pictures, and is both an extraordinary student of this history. He went to Dartmouth. He majored in this story. He's
and I would say that's the power of Colonial Williamsburg.
Very
That a little
much.
boy who started out here is now a filmmaker working with you and Ken on this massive series.
Yeah, I think he thinks about that every day, and then he says how he thought he knew something and he realizes every day that he doesn't, and then has to try to teach all of us. And I think for our writer, Jeff Ward, we stepped into this project with a little bit of anxiety and trepidation, because certainly for me, I love the actual documentary evidence of a still photograph, of a news report, of a contemporaneous report that we have vetted, historians have vetted. So for this, it's all, kind of both a creative challenge and imagination, but then I think our creed in the editing room is, okay, what does exist? What two-dimensional pieces of documentary evidence from the time are there, and how do we highlight them and put them into context? What are the extraordinary, beautiful places in this country that we all should see that still exist, that have been built up or haven't been built up? How do we film them in what we're famous for, kind of timeless way that all of you have seen if you've seen our films? And then how do we film them anew, high up in the air? How do we get to know the people who go to reenactments, which is a really interesting part of our country, and work with them? So we've filmed in 85 locations, probably close to 100 days of live cinematography, which for us is really new and different. We've brought in 15,000 still images. We have looked at nearly 2,000 maps. Maps are a really interesting piece of documentary evidence from the time. They're complicated and political, like everything else in our history, but they're very interesting to study and beautiful to look at, and very helpful. There are pamphlets, newspaper accounts, letters, some diaries. And then, because there aren't living witnesses, we've tried to find people who've left some kind of evidence, those that were literate, where there are actual words, and then whose stories we haven't heard. And it's been really, it's very exciting and overwhelming, and we both can't wait for it to be finished and have a lot to do before it's done.
Yeah. So we've teased the film a little bit, so maybe it's time to take a look at it. So would you set up, we have 2 clips we're going to share with you, which I think we're going to run together.
Yeah.
And do you want to set them up and then put all the disclaimers around them and build on what Cliff started a little while ago, plus put your cell phones away?
Yes,
Yeah.
Please put your cell phones away. Yeah, so as Cliff said, this is the first time we're showing anything to an audience. We're going to show you 2 clips today from the first and the second episode. The first clip is from our first episode, and it looks at the role of women in colonial society before the war. We filmed a lot of what you'll see today here and thought that might be fun for all of you. And then the second clip is from June of 1775, after a battle that many of you have probably heard of and studied and written about and thought about, which is the Battle of Bunker Hill, and what happened in the aftermath of that battle. I will say a lot of caveats very quickly. The first is, this is really a rough cut out of our Avid. The narration will change, the images will probably change. They're very low resolution. It's gonna sound a little bit distorted, so please lean in, particularly when the historians are talking. And for those of you who don't know how we make our films, until the final word and the final narration is set, Ken is our narrator. So those of you who are familiar with Ken, you will hear him narrating the film. And we've just started recording an incredible cast of actors. So you will probably hear some famous people whose voices you know, reading some of the archival characters that we have in the series. And so, yes, please don't film or take photographs. Sit back and enjoy it. And I can't wait to feel the room. 12 more hours.
So one of the things I was thinking about as I was, and by the way, this is the first time I've seen these 2 clips sitting here with you. So this is how closely held all of this material is. But one of the things that to me is always notable about the work that you do are the range of historians that you bring together to work on a project like this. Can you talk about that for a few minutes?
Sure. And I should have said earlier that I think when we talk to audiences who are interested in how we make our films, people are often surprised that whether we're making a film about Ernest Hemingway or the Vietnam War or country music or the revolution, our process is actually fairly similar. And one of the first things that we do is try to figure out who in the country, and in some cases the world, has spent their life studying the subject that we're about to dive into. And we really work extremely closely with those scholars and advisors, both behind the scenes and in front of the camera sometimes, from the day we decide to make the film until we hand it to your network. So for this series, because there aren't any witnesses who were alive then to meet, we really spent the first year or two reading a lot and trying to figure out which historians, graduate students, public history people, not just academics, would be interesting for us to work with, both in front of and behind the camera. And that British historian Stephen Conway, we actually did that interview about 3 weeks ago. We don't do all the interviews at one time, and then we really work sort of as a handmade quilt the whole time we're going. So we're always shooting, we're always writing, we're always researching, we're always trying to figure out who to talk with. And one of the most helpful, thoughtful, brilliant scholars who's in the film is Jane Kaminsky, who was here this morning and you all got to hear from. So she was one of our first meetings and helped us figure out. But for this film in particular, it's always both daunting and very rewarding to bring the scholars together and have them tell us what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what we've got too much of, what we need to do more of. And they really do they read every word and they hold us accountable. We're lucky.
The thing that is, to me, the most exciting about working with you, actually with so much of the work we do on PBS, but particularly the work that we do with you, is the impact of a series like this, which has the potential to reach everyone. PBS is free and accessible to every person in this country. We also make our content available streamed. We'll talk in a few minutes about education, what we do directly in the classroom. To give you an example of impact, a few years back when you worked on the series on the National Parks, America's Best Idea, this is the title of that series, the attendance at national parks in this country went up by 10 million people. And so often when we look at projects that we do with you, we're obviously proud of a documentary that is of record. I am always interested in young people that come up to me, kids in particular, that have seen something new for the first time called the Civil War, and don't realize that film was done how many years ago?
I think 1990.
Yes. So the opportunity, I think, for a project like this to really create engagement opportunities. And as I said, with our 330 stations, what we're attempting to do and bring together is to have every station in the country set up to do convenings, to do local stories. We're particularly focused outside of the 13 colonies to look for ways that we're really making the story come alive. Because I was thinking as I was listening to Rosie Rios's speech about how do we really engage and bring the country together. I think it will be that opportunity to make sure that we're touching every state, so get Alaska signed up, that we get everyone really excited and empowered about the fact that this is America's story. A part of that is obviously the work we do in classrooms, which is something, again, that Williamsburg also does so beautifully. We run something called Learning Media, which is free. It's through our stations. It's delivered via broadband content. Part of that is the Ken Burns Classroom.
Yeah.
And we think about the education, not when the film is finished, but as we're working on it. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and some of the thoughts around how we're looking at this project?
Sure. I think I'll pretend I'm Ken for a second and say that I think there's probably a classroom, a student somewhere across the country today is studying one of our films and one of our lesson plans. And one of the reasons, many reasons that we live at public television is the educational component to our film. So, and I think it was actually you a few years ago, we used to make our lesson plans in the last year of production. Sort of as we were finishing the film, we would scramble to figure out how to do the education component. And Paula actually tasked us many years ago, let's not wait, let's do it as we're making the film. And so we have really adopted that for the last few big series. So as we were doing research for the Revolution, as we've been editing, as we've been making the film, we've been trying to think about and work with people in this room actually, what material does exist already. We know we can reach all levels of student, which isn't always the case with our stuff. So we're looking at elementary, middle, high school, college, and then adult learners. We want to have real dialogue in the country and to inspire people who are just adult learners to think about the education possibilities. So we tend to find teachers and content that already exists and co-brand it. We say to different educators, okay, we have this big film. We tend to boil it down. What are the 5 themes you think students at each age would really like? And we develop that content as we're finishing the series. And then we spend really, truly a lot of time going to classrooms ourselves, sending out toolkits, working with WETA, our presenting station, to try to have dynamic classroom materials that teachers really want to use. Film is powerful. Students love it. Students can use documentary evidence. A lot of the material in this film is in the public domain. Students love to make their own little movies and to think about our history and to find stories that they connect to. You know, Ken always says history is made up of the word story, and everybody's interested in a good story, particularly students, and that's what we try to highlight.
And I think that when I always think about the work that we're doing, if you look at all the people that watch PBS, and we have a very large audience that's under the age of 5, and we travel all the way through life's journey. But I do think that the opportunity to have our content available, the one category, the one group of people that use PBS more than anyone else are teachers, like by far. And so part of the idea of creating learning media, we're used by over 1 million teachers a month, is to make sure that we are building material they actually can use. So your point about, you know, making sure we understand what is going to be not just extracurricular, but will be part of their core lesson. I think that's going to be important. And I think as for all of you, and many of you are educators or involved in doing similar type of work, I think this is the opportunity, because I think as we get closer to 2026 and teachers are really thinking about how to bring this story to life, that will be an important part. Now, one of the things that I've always been interested when I talk to you and I've talked to Ken and and actually a little bit talking to David, is when you start projects, I used to believe that you started with some like great base of knowledge and then made the film, but that's not exactly the case, right? You learn as you go. So for this project in particular, what were some of the big surprises as you, again, this is not a finished film, so
Right.
Things
I might have a
still
different answer
unfolding.
in 2025 or 26.
I'm actually certain you will, but thus far, I mean, what
Yeah.
are you learning as you've gone through this journey over the last years and sort of just living through this material?
Right. Well, I'm really lucky. I have an amazing job. I feel like I learn something new every day, and I get to go home and tell my children about it. I think, for me personally, 2 things really come to light. One is, I think I was surprised when we started working on the project how little we collectively know about our origin story. I think we all think we know a lot about it, and the second you peel the onion back, if you haven't studied it since 8th grade, which many of us, not in this room, but in the country haven't, you know very, very little. And so, for me, 2 things. One, that it was unlikely that we were going to win, and we couldn't have won without France, and that it was actually a global war as much as it was a very intensely local war. And I think that will pique students' interests because it makes it more complicated, and people are interested in complicated things. I really do believe that. And then, I think we've talked a lot about in the last few days, whose stories are told, whose story is it? How do we come together to hear about each other's stories and experience? And I think we have an opportunity to learn from one another because we are such a great and diverse nation with lots of stories to tell both happy and sad, good and bad, and that makes us stronger and better. So I have yet to make a film I know anything about when we start, and I mean that sincerely. And we basically go to school for 5 or 10 years as we make these big series, and feel really privileged to be able to do that.
When I'm going to ask you one question for yourself, and then I want to call out a few other people that are in the room. This is like a fully immersive experience. Do you dream about this at night? She didn't know I was going to ask this question. I mean, is it because I've been in your edit room and I see how you all work so closely together. I mean, this is all consuming, and I'm just so curious about how you put yourself in that place and
Ken
where that
dreams
takes
about it a lot. I will tell you that. Ken is always in the morning. I have a almost daily morning call with him. Okay, what are we going to do today? And then David lives on the West Coast, so we don't wake him up quite that early. I think at this stage of the project, the thing we really think about are the challenges of visualizing it. And we're also a group of real worriers, so
well, that's a surprise.
we poke a hole in whatever. If one of us thinks we're really sure about something, it's kind of like debate prep. Everyone punches a hole in what you think is right until we feel like, okay, we could really argue our position on this particular image or this piece of music or this actor reading or this fact, or is this boring, or is this so interesting we should make it longer? It's a very organic process, and I feel like I'm channeling Ken because he can't be here today, but in our editing room, honestly, there's a huge neon sign that says it's complicated. And that's kind of our creed. And we do think about it, sort of dream about it. We listen to, and then I go home and watch Shogun, so I don't have to think about,
Now we know.
Yeah, that's my, different kinds of television. But I think, I was hesitant to make a film where there wasn't a photographic record in the same way that there is for Vietnam or the Second World War, even the Civil War, particularly because it's a film about a war. 18th century war was really brutal and awful, and living through, I think kids would love to know that an army marches from New England to Yorktown, right, in the summer with animals. Like, how did they get there? I think we do a disservice to our students if we don't put them in these incredible sagas and places to think about what that was like. We made a map actually recently about the smallpox epidemic, and any kid that grew up in COVID is going to look at that map and just, it's an amazing, the way history both rhymes and echoes and is different, and how far we've come. I mean, you didn't have Gore-Tex and Polar Tech and, little weapons. It was
Sunscreen.
Sunscreen. The weather was really crazy.
Yeah.
Cold winters, hot summers, lots of rain. And then, most important revolution.
Yeah.
So, let alone all the politics of it. And we were talking about that last night, 13 disparate colonies, 26 colonies. What is the role of the Caribbean? How was France looking at us? How was, Spain looking at us? The British Empire. It's all really fascinating.
We're really excited to bring this story as part of this larger celebration of our country. It will broadcast in the fall of 2025. So we will be in advance of the big celebration because we feel like this is something that can be used over the course of that year. And I think that was another thing that very early on in the conversations, making sure that we were out a little earlier so that we give you something that you can use. And hopefully that will be a powerful gift. Now, there are a few people in the room that are deeply involved in so much of the engagement work that we'll be doing, and I told you I would make you stand. So yeah. Amy Lubensky is in the room somewhere. Amy, where are you? There she is. Amy is with WETA, who is our presenting station, who has worked with Ken on all of his projects, almost all of his projects, not the very beginning ones. And she will be the central person coordinating with all of our stations. Joe DePlasco is also in the room somewhere.
He's in the
with
back.
PKC. He's in the back, waving, and he has been our true visionary partner as we've been trying to map out a complicated scope of activities with a range of partners and engagement. And Sumner Manchero is with PBS, and she's standing next to Wave. I'm pointing them out because they will be with you through the day, and as Sarah mentioned, we'll be taping here tomorrow. But please reach out to them now that you see their faces and talk to them about how you may engage. And just because I'm on the stage and I have the mic, I can do it. I just want to point out Jamie Swain, who is sitting in the front. Jamie Swain is the president of Virginia Public Media, Richmond, Charlottesville, and is awesome. And she's also a member of the PBS board. So she is one of our 330 strong that will be looking to move this project forward. So we're really very excited about everything that we hope to do with you. And I'll just end with the way I began. I do believe that this is an extraordinarily important moment where we can find our shared past. And we can do something fairly profound in bringing us together. And let's not, please, lose this moment. Because if we do, shame on all of us. That's how I feel about this project and why we are putting so much energy behind it, why we're out early talking about it and showing you and teasing you with some early clips. Because we do believe that this larger celebration, all the things that you're trying to do, Rosie, with the commissioners, is really not just about a date on a calendar. It is about helping us to understand where we've come from, so we understand where we're going, and those principles of things like volunteerism, which is uniquely American. You're going to break that record because that is who we are. Yeah. And so let's use this moment to better understand each other, learn how to listen to each other, and celebrate this great experiment in democracy that we're all living through. Thank you.
Amen.